On July 26, 2023, a coup in one of the world's poorest nations triggered a chain reaction that would challenge France, arm North Korea, and force the entire global financial system to reveal a crack no one wanted to admit existed. Over 1,000 tons of uranium vanished from French control, sold to Pyongyang. And when Paris tried to stop the money, 3 African countries did something the West never prepared for. They stopped using dollars altogether. This isn't about Africa anymore. This is about whether the rules that built the modern world still apply to anyone. And the answer is about to get very uncomfortable. On July 26, 2023, the Presidential Guard in Niger detained Mohamed Bazoum, the country's democratically elected leader. What followed wasn't just another coup in the Sahel. It was the opening shot in a battle over one of the most valuable resources on the continent, uranium. And at the center of it all stood France, the former colonial power that had quietly controlled Niger's uranium for more than half a century. For decades, Niger has been one of the world's top uranium producers. The yellow or pulled from its deserts powered French nuclear reactors, kept the lights on in Paris, and fueled a strategic energy independence that Paris guarded fiercely. But here's the part that matters. While France's nuclear industry thrived, Niger remained one of the poorest countries on Earth. The contracts governing uranium extraction were negotiated in the shadows of decolonization, structured in ways that left Nigerians with a fraction of the wealth buried beneath their feet. To many in Niamey, this wasn't commerce. It was extraction. It was colonialism with a corporate logo. Enter Colonel Abdurrahman Tiani. After seizing power in the summer of 2023, his junta didn't just consolidate control. They turned their attention to the uranium sector. And they didn't stop at rhetoric. In a move that sent shockwaves through European energy circles, the new military government began the process of expelling Orano, the French state-backed company that had operated in Niger since the 1970s. The message was unmistakable. Niger's uranium belongs to Niger, not to Paris, not to any foreign power. This is sovereignty reclaimed. This wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. For years, civil society groups, opposition voices, and everyday Nigerians had questioned why their country exported uranium to light up foreign cities, while many of their own villages sat in darkness. Why French engineers lived in gated compounds while Nigerian miners worked in hazardous conditions for low wages. The resentment simmered quietly under successive governments that maintained close ties with France. But once the military took over, that resentment became policy. France didn't take it well. Uranium from Niger accounts for a meaningful share of the fuel that runs its reactors. Losing access wasn't just an economic blow. It was a strategic vulnerability. For a country that prides itself on energy independence and projects power across Francophone Africa, this was more than a contract dispute. It was a direct challenge to influence, to legacy, to the entire post-colonial architecture that had kept French interests embedded across the Sahel. What makes this moment dangerous is the timing. Niger's decision to break with France coincided with a rise of new partners willing to step in. Russia, through both state channels and private military influence, had already made inroads across the region. China, with its Belt and Road infrastructure model, was expanding its footprint in African mining. Turkey, the UAE, even Iran, all saw opportunity in the power vacuum left by retreating Western influence. So this wasn't just about Niger asserting control. It was about a geopolitical chessboard being redrawn square by square. And the implications stretch far beyond uranium. If Niger can successfully expel a former colonial power and reclaim its resources without facing crippling consequences, other countries will be watching. Mali and Burkina Faso have already moved in similar directions, cutting ties with France and inviting alternative partnerships. The model is spreading. Resource nationalism is no longer a fringe position in the Sahel. It's becoming doctrine. This is where the stakes become clear. What started as a military coup in a landlocked nation has escalated into a test case for African sovereignty in the 21st century. Can a country rich in resources but poor in infrastructure chart its own course? Or will external powers, whether Western or otherwise, continue to shape outcomes behind the scenes? The uranium crisis in Niger isn't just about who controls the mines. It's about who controls the future. And right now, that question has no clear answer. France just accused North Korea of stealing over 1,000 tons of uranium. Not from Pyongyang, not from some covert mine in East Asia, from Niger. And the case Paris is building isn't just about missing nuclear fuel. It's about whether Western nations still get to decide what counts as legal when African countries make deals on their own terms. Here's what happened. After Niger's military government expelled French mining giant Orano and reclaimed control of its uranium sector, the junta didn't just sit on the stockpiles. They sold it. More than 1,000 tons of yellowcake uranium, one of the most strategically sensitive materials on the planet, went to North Korea, a country under some of the strictest sanctions in modern history. A country explicitly banned from engaging in nuclear commerce by multiple UN Security Council resolutions. And a country that, for France, represents everything Paris has spent decades trying to contain. The French response was immediate and sharp. Paris didn't just lodge a diplomatic protest. It escalated this into a full legal confrontation, accusing Pyongyang of conspiring with Niamey to destabilize European energy security. The language mattered. France framed the uranium as unlawfully seized, arguing that the contracts Orano held were binding, that the transfer violated international norms, and that North Korea knowingly participated in what amounts to resource theft on a strategic scale. In French eyes, this wasn't a sale. It was complicity in undermining the legal frameworks that govern global nuclear trade. But here's where it gets complicated. Niger and North Korea don't see it that way at all. To them, this is a transaction between two sovereign states exercising their right to engage in commerce without Western approval. Niger's position is clear. The uranium was extracted from Nigerian soil under contracts that were negotiated under colonial pressure, and the country now has every right to control and sell its own resources. Pyongyang's calculus is even simpler. They needed uranium. Niger had it. They made a deal. And neither government believes France or any former colonial power has the standing to dictate what Niger can or cannot do with what's buried beneath its own territory. This is more than a legal dispute. It's a clash over who gets to define legitimacy in the post-colonial world. France is invoking international law, contracts, and the principle that certain materials require regulated oversight to prevent proliferation. Niger is invoking sovereignty, the right to self-determination, and the argument that Western-imposed legal structures are themselves tools of control. And North Korea? They're leveraging the situation to challenge the same sanctions regime that has isolated them for decades, framing this deal as proof that the global order isn't as universal as Washington and Brussels claim. The timing couldn't be worse for Europe. France is already grappling with energy insecurity after years of reliance on nuclear power fueled in part by Niger's uranium. Losing access to those supplies was damaging enough. But watching them end up in North Korea, a state actively developing its nuclear arsenal, transforms this from an economic problem into a security crisis. If Pyongyang can secure uranium through African partners willing to defy Western pressure, the entire sanctions architecture begins to look porous. Other countries watching this unfold might start asking, if Niger can do it, why can't we? And that's exactly what makes this moment so volatile. This isn't just about one shipment. It's about whether resource-rich nations in Africa, Asia, or Latin America can bypass traditional Western markets and legal frameworks entirely by partnering with states outside the Euro-Atlantic sphere. Russia has already shown this model works with energy and grain. China is doing it with rare earth minerals and infrastructure financing. Now Niger and North Korea are testing it with uranium. France just tried to cut off Niger's money. Not with soldiers. Not with sanctions voted on at the UN. With banks. And what happened next is forcing the entire Sahel region to ask a question that could reshape African economics for a generation. What if we just stopped using their system altogether? After Niger sold over 1,000 tons of uranium to North Korea, Paris didn't just protest. It moved to choke the flow of money. France leveraged its influence over Western financial infrastructure, the same networks that process transactions in dollars and euros, to block payments tied to Niger's new deals. The strategy was clear: make it impossible for Niamey to profit from defying French interests. If you can't access the money, the thinking goes, the deal becomes worthless. It's financial warfare, conducted through SWIFT codes and correspondent banking relationships, and it's been a tool of Western power for decades. But Niger didn't fold. Instead, it adapted, and so did its neighbors. Across the Sahel, from Bamako to Ouagadougou, governments that had already broken with France began exploring something that once seemed fringe, but now looks increasingly viable: barter trade, alternative payment systems, and full-scale de-dollarization. If Western banks won't let you move money, stop moving money through Western banks. It's not a new idea, but what's new is how quickly it's becoming policy. Barter trade sounds archaic, almost medieval, but in practice, it's strategic. Niger has uranium, Mali has gold, Burkina Faso has other minerals. Russia needs resources and offers weapons, grain, and energy in return. China provides infrastructure and takes payment in commodities. Suddenly, the entire transactional model that kept African exports flowing through European and American financial hubs starts to look optional. And once it's optional, it's vulnerable. This is where the stakes become clear. For decades, the dominance of the dollar and euro in global trade gave Washington and Brussels extraordinary leverage. Sanctions worked because they could cut off access to the financial arteries that keep economies alive, freeze assets, block transactions, isolate entire governments. But that power only holds if everyone plays by the same rules. And across the Sahel, across much of the global south, governments are now asking, why should we? De-dollarization isn't just rhetoric anymore. It's infrastructure. China's cross-border interbank payment system, known as CIPS, offers an alternative to SWIFT. Russia, despite being heavily sanctioned, has developed its own internal payment networks and is expanding trade in rubles and yuan. Even within Africa, regional initiatives are pushing for greater use of local currencies in intra-African trade, reducing dependency on foreign exchange altogether. What France is discovering, perhaps too late, is that financial exclusion only works if there's no alternative. And alternatives are multiplying. Niger's pivot didn't happen in isolation. Mali expelled French forces and invited Russian military contractors. Burkina Faso followed a similar path. All three nations have now formed a defense and economic bloc, explicitly designed to reduce dependency on former colonial powers. The uranium deal with North Korea and the financial blockade that followed accelerated a process that was already underway. These aren't rogue states acting irrationally. They're countries testing whether sovereignty can exist outside Western financial systems. And so far, the answer appears to be yes. For France and for the broader West, this is more than an economic inconvenience. It's an erosion of influence. If African nations can trade, secure weapons, and finance infrastructure without needing dollars or euros, then the ability to shape their politics through financial pressure evaporates. And if the Sahel model works, other regions will take note. Latin America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Any country that has chafed under sanctions, under conditionality, under the implicit threat that access to global finance can be revoked at will. What happens next isn't certain, but the direction is. The more Western powers use financial systems as weapons, the faster alternatives will emerge. And the faster those alternatives become viable, the less leverage the old powers will have. Niger's uranium deal may have triggered the legal battle, but the financial war that followed is forcing a question no one in Paris or Washington wanted to answer. What happens when the rest of the world stops needing us to move their money? A landlocked country in the Sahel just became the front line of a global power shift. And the fact that North Korea is involved tells you everything you need to know about how fast the old order is unraveling. Niger's decision to expel French mining interests and sell uranium to Pyongyang wasn't just bold. It was symbolic. It marked the moment when a former French colony, one of the poorest nations on Earth by GDP, decided it would rather deal with a pariah state under international sanctions than continue playing by rules written in Paris. That's not desperation. That's a calculated rejection of the entire framework that has governed African resources since independence. And it's happening at a time when that framework is already cracking under pressure from Beijing to Moscow, from Tehran to Ankara. This is what declining influence looks like in real time. For over 60 years, France maintained a sphere of control across Francophone Africa that was economic, military, and deeply political. French troops provided security. French companies extracted resources. The CFA franc, backed by the French treasury, tied regional economies to Paris whether they liked it or not. It was a system designed to outlast formal colonialism, and for decades it worked. But systems built on dependency eventually face a reckoning. And across the Sahel, that reckoning is no longer theoretical. Niger isn't acting alone. Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger have all expelled French forces, invited Russian military influence, and begun restructuring their economies to reduce reliance on Western institutions. What ties them together isn't ideology. It's frustration. Frustration that decades of alignment with the West didn't translate into development, didn't prevent insurgencies, didn't give them real control over their own wealth. And when that frustration meets opportunity, in the form of alternative partnerships that don't come with lectures about governance or democracy, the shift accelerates. Enter North Korea. Pyongyang's involvement isn't accidental. It's a statement. A country isolated by Western sanctions for decades just secured over 1,000 tons of uranium from an African state willing to defy France, the European Union, and the broader transatlantic order. That deal doesn't just supply North Korea's nuclear program. It demonstrates that the sanctions architecture built and enforced by Washington and its allies has limits. Real limits. If Niger can trade with Pyongyang and survive the backlash, then other nations operating outside Western favor will take note. And they are. This is where the stakes become clear. What's unfolding in Niger is about more than one country or one commodity. It's a test case for whether the multipolar world that analysts have talked about for years is actually arriving. For decades, global order meant Western order. The institutions that mattered, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN Security Council, were dominated by the same powers that had colonial empires a generation earlier. But that dominance required buy-in. It required countries to believe they had more to gain by staying inside the system than by stepping outside it. And increasingly across Africa, across the global south, that belief is eroding. China offers infrastructure without conditionality. Russia offers security without sermons. Turkey, the UAE, even Iran, all present themselves as partners who respect sovereignty in ways the West, they argue, never did. Whether those claims hold up under scrutiny is almost beside the point. What matters is that the narrative of Western indispensability is breaking down. And when that narrative collapses, so does the leverage it provided. France is learning this the hard way. Paris can accuse Niger of illegal transfers. It can freeze financial channels. It can invoke international law and treaty obligations. But if Niamey, backed by a coalition of neighbors and supported by extra-regional powers willing to trade outside Western systems, simply refuses to comply, then what? Military intervention is politically untenable. Sanctions are losing their bite as alternatives emerge. Diplomatic isolation only works if the isolated party has nowhere else to turn. And Niger, like much of the Sahel, is discovering it has options. What began as a dispute over uranium has become something much larger. A struggle over who defines legitimacy, who controls resources, and whether sovereignty in the 21st century can exist outside the institutions built by 20th century powers. North Korea's role in this story isn't a sideshow. It's proof that the system is no longer airtight. And once that becomes clear, the realignment won't stop at the Sahel. It will spread. The only question left is how far and how fast.